Welcome everybody to Hoop Symmetry, where we discuss basketball in detail in hopes of continuing to push the balance surrounding the game of basketball. Today we have a very good video. We're talking about the 2024 NBA offseason and every team's moves. We're going from A to Z alphabetically in order to discuss how these teams did in order to help their teams become better this year. So starting off with the Hawks, just to recap some of the moves they did. They re-signed Vic Krejci on a multi-year deal. They added Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, Larry Nance, and Cody Zeller. Ended up losing Saddiq Bey in free agency, and ended up also losing A.J. Griffin and DeJounte Murray via trade. They had the number 1 pick overall, where they drafted Zachary Rizache out of France. And then they ended up also acquiring Nikola Duricic, via trade with Miami. I ended up giving Atlanta a C grade. It just wasn't very inspiring one way or the other, in my opinion. They had some solid draft picks, but nothing to really write home about. I personally felt like another player was the best player in the draft, but Zachary Rizache's a nice swing wing. I also like Nikola Duricic that they got in the second round. He's a versatile big, good wing shooter with long-term playmaking potential. Losing DeJounte Murray and Saddiq Bey does hurt them. But in the same hand, the Hawks are just in this kind of limbo period where they're in that dreaded purgatory, which we'll be talking about a lot more, where we don't know whether they want to rebuild and just blow it all up by trading Trae Young, or whether or not they want to go ahead and try to make win now moves, trying to add around Trae Young. So that's really going to determine, how we view this team. I like the Dyson Daniels acquisition. I do think that could be a very nice backcourt with him and Trae Young if they do decide to keep him. We'll see what happens with Johnson, who had a breakout year last year. Also DeAndre Hunter, who's under a big contract at that wing position. We don't know what they want to do with him. Will we finally see Big O step into the starting lineup instead of Clint Capella? I know a lot of Atlanta Hawks fans have been clamoring for that to happen so they can continue with this rebuilding phase instead of constantly, kind of plateauing out on their potential. They also have a couple of young guys who I'm excited to see if they can take another step up this year. Kobe Buffkin was a guy that I kind of liked. He kind of had some Jordan Poole type of potential, in my opinion, if he was allowed to kind of do his thing. Overall, you only got 1 first-round pick, which will probably be a late first in 2027 because the worst of the Bucks or the Pelicans. You got that pick from the Lakers. So for the DeJounte Murray trade. You only got 1 first-round pick from the Lakers. It's going to be the worst of whoever has the worst record between the Bucks and the Pelicans in 2027. Again, not that great of a pick. So overall, again, because the Hawks kind of went in this purgatory direction, whether we don't know if they're rebuilding or whether or not they're retooling or whether or not they're trying to make win now moves, I gave them a C grade. The next team on the docket is the defending NBA champion Boston Celtics. So the Boston Celtics basically just re-signed all their players. They re-signed Luke Kornet, Neemias Queta also returned. Sam Hauser had a 4-year extension. Jason Tatum, again, of course, he signed the max. Xavier Tillman returned. Derek White, they got that deal done. And they lost nobody. So they didn't really add anybody or didn't really lose anybody, except for in the draft, they drafted Baylor Shireman, number 30 overall. I think that was a very, very, very good pickup for the value that they had him in. Looks like he's going to be a nice shooter, potential rotation wing. You can never use too many of those on your roster. He looks like he's ready to play right now if they need him to, but they won't need him to. And they also got Anton Watson late in that second round. So I ended up giving the Celtics a B because, I felt like the Celtics did everything that they needed to do. They didn't need to have a big offseason because they are the defending champions in one of the deepest teams I think we can all agree to that we've seen in a while. So nothing really super eventful for them. And with the limited resources that they had, again, the 30th pick, I think they got a very, very good value in Baylor Shireman. And being able to re-sign all of their players, getting that extension for Derek White was huge. So overall, give Celtics a solid B. Not too high, not too low. On to our next team, which is the Brooklyn Nets. So for Brooklyn, they ended up re-signing Nick Claxton, who I know fans were happy to see that deal get done. They also re-signed Keon Johnson and Trendon Watford. They ended up adding Bojan Bogdanovic in that Mikal Bridges trade. and also got Shake Milton and Zaire Williams in some trade deals, and lost Mikal Bridges, of course, one of the bigger moves of the NBA offseason, and lost Keita Bates-Diop. So for Brooklyn, again, there was nothing really noteworthy here. I'm glad that they got to re-sign Claxton. I know he's a fan favorite. I'm actually not personally a huge Claxton guy, but I know many smart basketball people who I respect who really swear by Nick Claxton. He is a versatile mobile big, so fits the modern NBA. I understand why people like him so much. Not really my favorite player. But getting him, keeping him a young player with potential was a very good signing for them. And they did get 5 first-round picks for the Mikal Bridges trade and a future pick swap. So, they did get some valuable assets to be able to retool or to speed up this rebuilding process that they're going. And they still have some guys on the roster which they can still unload for even more assets. They still have Finney Smith, Dennis Schroeder, Cam Johnson on that roster, and all of those guys can probably get them some extra draft capital. So again, they're not in a horrible spot for them to be in. They also have Jalen Wilson on the roster, who obviously just won the Summer League MVP. So he was showing a lot of promise. Hopefully he gets more run if they are able to unload more of those guys. And of course, we still have Cam Thomas and some other guys on that roster who are really vying for a chance to establish themselves in the league. So they still have potential there, but overall, not very eventful of an offseason for them. I gave them a C- for this offseason. Again, they didn't really do much of anything, and I wasn't too high on any of the additions that they really made. Next on the list, we have the Charlotte Hornets. So Charlotte Hornets, they did add some pieces this offseason. They went ahead and got my guy Josh Green in a trade. I actually really like Josh Green. I think he can have mini Josh Hart type of value, and I do think he fits the team if they actually empower him in that starting 2-guard role. So I think if the Hornets' plan is to empower Josh Green in that starting 2-guard role, I really like that pickup. But sometimes the NBA is a little funny with that. You kind of only get as much opportunity as your value, so to speak, suggests. But they ended up re-signing Miles Bridges and Seth Curry. They added Taj Gibson and, of course, Josh Green, which you talked about. Lost David Bertans, Reggie Jackson, and Bryce McGowens. They had the number 6 overall pick where they drafted Tijan Salon in a controversial move and ended up getting KJ Simpson late in the second round with pick number 42 overall. So overall, I gave Charlotte a C+. Okay, the main reason was I wasn't a big fan of the Tijan Salon selection. I really wanted them to go Matas Buzelis at that point. I'm really high on him. I think he can be like a modern day Andre Kirilenko type of player with a little bit more playmaking upside. But they ended up going Salon, which I think was a reach, and a lot of people also agree that that was a reach. But who knows? He does fit a positional need, and he does have potential at that position. If his shot continues to develop and starts falling at a higher clip, and he can kind of polish up some of those other aspects of his game, both offensively and defensively, then they may have something there long term. But I do think this is a team that's probably trying to start winning around this time. You got LaMelo, got the 2-guard spot, which they've been looking to fill and haven't really had too much success with. Like I said, my suggestion would be Josh Green, but we'll see what they end up doing. They have, of course, Brandon Miller, who looks like a future star. Miles Bridges, who has promise there, or Salon, the rookie they can throw there. And then I do really like Mark Williams there at that center spot. They also have Grant Williams, who probably will get the start at the 4, giving them more of a veteran off-ball defensive type of presence to mesh with the starting group. They also have a couple of young guys, again, who I'm looking to see what they do this year. Nick Smith Jr., I really liked what I saw from him in the Summer League this year. Again, a nice backup potential point guard who can both create for others and create more shots off the bounce, which the Hornets really need around LaMelo, him being the kind of the solo creator right now, and sometimes Brandon Miller. And maybe Brandon Miller will moonlight in that role as well. They also got Trey Mann off the bench, who, again, we'll see what he can do. He was having a really, really good time with the Thunder. Thunder fans, I know, are sad to see him go. And we'll see if he can kind of get some solid footing and some consistency with the team. But overall, I do think the Hornets are finally starting to gain a direction, which is always good. You kind of, at least want to start off with having a direction in mind, and which the Hornets have. And so we'll see what they do, but overall, I think it was a C+. Next on the list, we have the Chicago Bulls. Now, the Chicago Bulls made some interesting moves this offseason. They re-signed Patrick Williams to a 5-year extension, which I know, a lot of Bulls fans have mixed feelings about. The always ongoing potential of Patrick Williams, when will it ever be realized? I guess we'll continue to wait and see. But they also added Chris Duarte in a trade. They got Josh Giddey in another trade, which we'll talk about a little bit more. They got Jalen Smith out of free agency. They ended up losing Alex Caruso, which is a part of the trade that we'll talk about. DeMar DeRozan was involved in that Duarte trade. And they lost Andre Drummond to free agency. But they also had the number 11th pick overall, where they added, again, aforementioned Matas Buzelis from the G League Ignite. So let's first talk about the Josh Giddey trade. That was their most eventful move this summer. Now, personally, trade two different ways. If you look at this trade from a value system, I definitely think this was not a great trade for Chicago. I think they waited too late, which is thematic of all of their moves. They kind of waited too late to unload players and ended up getting, pennies for the dollar, or pennies on the dollar for players that they could have got at a much higher rate if they would have made the move earlier. And so you ended up basically trading one of your more valuable assets for one of your more valuable commodities in Alex Caruso and not getting back any draft capital. So I can understand how any Bulls fan would look at that as like, okay, clearly that's an L. However, if we just take away the value system part of things and just look at the player that they got, I do really like the fit of Josh Giddey next to Coby White. If you look at Coby White is a very promising young guard. He's playing the point guard position, but Coby White is more naturally a scorer. If you go back and watch him back in high school, he did a lot of off-ball work, off the ball as a scorer and a shooter. I really also think that's a part of his game that's a little bit untapped in the NBA that I really feel like a coach can pull out. And if they're able to get out that off-ball potential from Coby White, I definitely think that he can benefit greatly from that. However, since being at UNC, he's been asked to be more of an on-ball point guard, and he's done really well at that for what he's been asked to do. But that's not his natural inclination. He's a smaller scoring guard, and I'd like the pairing of a smaller scoring guard next to a taller playmaking guard. Josh Giddey's not much of a scorer at all, and he ended up looking a lot worse than he is in Oklahoma City because of the role he was asked to play. Doesn't really fit his game. He was kind of playing a fish out of water role for him, which exacerbated how bad he looked, on top of the off-court controversy that everyone or a lot of people heard that he was in, where he's getting extra scrutiny for. But so they ended up getting Josh Giddey from the Thunder for Caruso, which I do like that move for their fit. I think that's a long-term solution there. Re-sign Patrick Williams. We'll see what he does at that wing spot. Drafted Matas Buzelis, who like I said, I really like. So, of course, I'm giving extra bonus points for doing that. I also feel that's a long-term fit there. And so, overall, I gave them a B-, a B-. Right now they're in that purgatory, which I talked about. They're in that purgatory range. They don't really know if they're going to be good or bad. They're kind of like too good to be horrendous, but too bad to do anything meaningful. So they're right there in that purgatory range, which is never a place where people want to be. But, this year's offseason kind of put them a little bit more into having a clear-cut direction. So we'll end up seeing what they do. The next team on the list is the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, the biggest move of the offseason for them was definitely re-signing Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley. So they retained their guys. However, they didn't add anybody or lose anybody in free agency. However, they did end up with the 20th pick overall in the first round and took Jalen Tyson, who was definitely a standout from this summer league. I really like what I saw out of him as a big guard who has some playmaking potential, some defensive potential, and some scoring chops to him. I think that gives him a lot of versatility depending on what they want to do. I think re-signing Donovan Mitchell, if your plan is to keep Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland as your long-term backcourt, I really hate that move. However, the only other option from re-signing Donovan Mitchell is to not, and re-signing him at least gives you the right so that you can still get back assets if you decide to trade Donovan Mitchell, which is what I think will happen eventually, most likely. And if that's the case, having another backcourt guard like Tyson that can maybe be your long-term starter there gives you a lot more flexibility as to the type of player that you want returning with a Donovan Mitchell trade. So again, that draft pick kind of made this a lot better. And like I said, I really like Tyson if he ends up being there. But again, nothing too eventful. Tyson had a great summer league. I still give this offseason a C overall because, again, yeah, you kept Mitchell, you got Jalen Tyson, but Again, it wasn't too much to really make a difference as to their next year prospects, in my opinion, nor probably even the year after that. So overall, just maybe a C move, but it's still not that bad. Next, we have the infamous Detroit Pistons. So Detroit, man, Detroit. I don't know. Every time I think of Detroit Pistons, all I think to myself is, man, poor Cade Cunningham. But this year may be a step in the right direction. So let's talk about what they did. They ended up re-signing Cade Cunningham to a max extension. Simone Fontecchio, who had a really good showing off ball last year. I really liked what I saw out of him. They ended up re-signing him to a 2-year deal. They ended up adding Malik Beasley in free agency and Tim Hardaway Jr. They got Tobias Harris and Wendell Moore and Paul Reed, and only lost Taj Gibson. They had the 5th overall pick in this year's draft, where they took G League Ignite's Ron Holland. They went ahead and got Bobby Klintman as well with pick number 37. And they ended up drafting Cam Spencer late in the 2nd round, who was then flipped to the Memphis Grizzlies. And Cam Spencer actually had a pretty good summer league, but we're not going to talk about that right now. All right, so overall, I do think this was a just a good offseason for Detroit. I've been kind of frustrated in the way that Detroit has been handling their team construction around Cade Cunningham. I mean, you have a tall, big, very smart playmaking, skilled guard who can shoot but isn't the greatest shooter, who's obviously, whenever you have that archetype of player, they're going to be better helped when you surround them with shooting. And even though they've drafted a lot of players who I individually like and I do believe have potential there, I don't think they fit in any type of cohesive unit. Like, if your draft picks are Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, all of these guys, and now even this year when you get Ron Holland, none of these guys are great shooters or great decision makers, and you're putting them around Cade. So, teams are just going to load up on Cade and just allow those other guys to play these 4-on-3 opportunities because they're not able to capitalize and space the floor properly with shooting, nor are they able to, make the right passes to kind of play in tight spaces to beat these teams in these 4-on-3 rotations. This year, I do think that they made, good additions that will help Detroit look like an actual sane modern basketball team. Again, adding Tobias Harris, a guy who can attack closeouts properly, make quick decisions off of those, whether it's catching, shooting, finishing, making the extra pass, making the skip pass. They got Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway, which help their shooting on the wings, who most teams will have to stay home on those guys. Way more. Fontecchio getting a 2-year deal. Again, that talks about what we talked about earlier when we talk about opportunity, going off of what they invest into you. So they invest a little more in him, so he should get more opportunity. I really think he had very good short stint towards that later half of that season. So I overall think that they did a lot of good moves to help this team look more respectable this upcoming year. Also, really, really like the draft pick of Bobby Klintman in that 2nd round. Bobby Klintman was one of my more underrated players I had on my draft board. Nice, tall, 3-and-D wing who just knows how to play the game, shoots it at a good clip, can defend, tall, rangy athlete. Really like Bobby Klintman, really like his fit there. So overall, I gave Detroit a solid B grade for their offseason. Again, just good, doing what you need to do to kind of help make sense, because you don't want Cade to be miserable there forever, which is what would have happened if you just kept just throwing out those young players as like a 5-man unit. Now, even though those young players don't fit all the way great together as like a 5-man unit, now you have enough veterans on the team so they don't have to function that way. You can kind of just spread it out and just have each, young player kind of mix and match with certain veteran groups so that you can have a more cohesive unit and Cade Cunningham doesn't lose all his hair before he turns 25. Next up on the list, we have the Indiana Pacers. So this offseason, they re-signed Andrew Nembhard to a lucrative 3-year deal. They also retained Pascal Siakam, which is huge because they traded for him, as everyone knows. And they also returned Obi Toppin and James Johnson, just in case anyone on the other team wants to act up. Okay, so they retained those guys. Then they ended up adding James Wiseman in free agency, which I also think is a very underrated signing. They needed productive backup big minutes, and now they have that potentially in Wiseman if he can figure it out, which I definitely think he can. Maybe not playing under Rick Carlisle, who doesn't believe in posting up for bigs, which is its own video. But, at least get some minutes and opportunity. They ended up losing Jalen Smith in free agency, and they had the number 35 overall pick, in which they drafted Johnny Furphy, who I also really like. This guy's like a gamer. You just put him in the game. It doesn't matter the 2, the 3, necessarily the position. He's just going to give you solid production. He's going to make shots. He's going to crash the boards, going to finish, cut. He's just a hooper. Like, I love guys like Johnny Furphy. And so I think that was a very good get. That was a really, really good get at pick number 35. And they ended up having to flip, Juan Nunez to the Spurs to end up getting him. But I think that was well worth it for them. They also ended up getting the Tristan Newton out of UConn in that second round, pick number 49. Again, I think that's a great value pick as well. Tristan Newton gives you that championship experience. He's a 2-time champ there. And they have good success. I mean, with those type of guards. We just talked about Andrew Nembhard. Same type of guy. There's a winning type of player. And I think those guys really, really bode well for playoff teams with those backup point guard positions. Gives you more guard depth. And, so I really like that pickup. And then they also got Enrique Freeman just to give him some more front court depth there. So this is another team which I just kind of gave a C, honestly, just because they didn't add anyone that I think is going to make too much of a difference for them this year, even though they got guys like Wiseman, who I think, again, could be a good backup big for them. But we know Rick Carlisle doesn't love Wiseman's style of bigs. And then they also got Johnny Furphy, who, again, I think he is ready to make an impact on a team now. But, again, that's hard asking him to do that for a team that was going deep in the playoffs this last year in this guy's rookie year, so I don't expect too much this year. So overall, again, I like what the Pacers did, but nothing too crazy, so I give them a C. I'm thinking about it again, they may be a C plus type of team, but I put a C, so I'm going to stick with a C. Moving along, that takes us to the Miami Heat. So the Miami Heat had the number 15 overall pick where they drafted Khalil Ware, and they also picked up Pelle Larsson at number 44 from Arizona via a trade with the Rockets. They ended up re-signing Bam Adebayo, who's playing Olympic basketball right now, which we all know. Thomas Bryant also returned. Haywood Highsmith returned. And Kevin Love was able to also get a new 2-year deal. They added Alec Burks in free agency, who had a good playoff run with the Knicks. But very, very unfortunately, they ended up losing Caleb Martin for free in the free agency pool, and they waived Orlando Robinson. So I want to talk about the draft side of things first for this team, because Khalil Ware is absolutely fantastic. This guy is a perfect modern big. He can shoot it. He runs the floor hard. He defends. He's very mobile, very versatile. And watching the Olympic basketball with Bam and AD playing, that leads me to believe that maybe Miami's looking at playing Bam at the 4 more, so it really, really helps that they have a floor spacing big that they can play beside him with real size. And they actually have 2 of them with Thomas Bryant, who ended up resigning on the veteran side of things, and drafting Khalil Ware, who they made play in minutes alongside of him. And then they also have Kevin Love, of course, who definitely plays some big. So the front court for Miami definitely got strengthened this offseason. I also really like Pelle Larsson, who had a pretty good summer league. Again, he showed his versatility. He can definitely shoot. And honestly, we've seen with Miami Heat, if you're a 6'6", a 6'8", white shooter, find Eric Spoelstra. He will find minutes for you and hopefully get you paid. We've seen this with Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, guys like that. Very, very good team fit as well. So I love that. We also have a whole new offseason and training camp where Terry Rozier gets to be acclimated to the team to give them more of a scoring punch. So I like the Miami Heat's offseason. I think they did good. I mean, it wasn't amazing. It wasn't world-beating, but I think they added the pieces that they need. But again, we also have to remember that just by having Rozier there a full year, that will also help the team by itself as well. Okay, so I'm giving Miami a B+ for their offseason. A B+ for the Miami Heat, who our team, I'm excited to see what they do this year. Maybe they can finally break through. Who knows? I doubt it, but hey, they gave themselves a chance. Now we have the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks are going to receive my first D grade. I really did not like much of what the Milwaukee Bucks did, but let's talk about what those things were. They had no re-signings. They ended up adding Taurean Prince, Delon Wright, and Gary Trent Jr., which was a good move. They drafted A.J. Johnson, number 23 overall, out of Illawarra. And they got Tyler Smith in the second round, pick number 33. Where do I start with Milwaukee? I mean, first of all, I didn't like their first round pick. A.J. Johnson, again, A.J. Johnson has potential, but this is a team trying to win a championship. And right now, if you have the first round pick, there were still guys, a lot of guys, left on the board that I feel like could have helped this team more than A.J. Johnson most likely would. Even if you had to trade that pick and get somebody in the door to help the Milwaukee Bucks, I think they probably could have utilized it that way. They're still missing a very good point of attack defender. I do like that they brought in Gary Trent. He's definitely an upgrade from Malik Beasley, who was playing that spot last year. But still, you're still missing probably your biggest weakness from last year, which is somebody who can guard the ball effectively right there at the top of the key, at the point of attack, as we talk about. And they still don't really have that. And the other problem I have with that pick of A.J. Johnson is Milwaukee has kind of showed over the recent years that they're not really interested in playing a lot of their young guys. Like, I think Marshawn Beauchamp has potential there at that two-guard spot, but he's never really been given any type of consistent minutes in that spot, and he still has a ways to go as far as a decision maker and knockdown shooter and on the defensive end of the ball. So, again, he's not like a savior, but I do think he probably has more potential to impact your team for winning in any type of meaningful way than A.J. Johnson at this point, who you just invested a top 25 pick in. I do like the 33rd overall pick, Tyler Smith. He may be able to help them a little bit this year as a tall lefty shooter. He knocked down shots for the G League Ignite this year at a high clip, and he even looked pretty good knocking down some shots in the Summer League. Like I said, but that's pretty much most of what the value that he gives you right now. And I don't know how much they're going to utilize that this year. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling this offseason much at all from the Milwaukee Bucks. I really think after a disappointing season last year with Giannis' injury and everything else that they could have used, more of a swing move, and they just really didn't. They really didn't do much of much. And again, that team is getting a lot older. Like the Pat Connaughton from 4 years ago isn't looking the same. Chris Middleton, even though he had some crazy shots made late in that year, he's not really looking the same. Brook Lopez is only getting older. Dame Lillard is only getting older. So I really thought they could have used, a nice move to infuse some energy and talent and defense and hustle into that lineup, and they just really didn't do much. So they're going to get a D grade from me. So now we're going to transition from probably my least favorite offseason in the Eastern Conference this year to my absolute favorite offseason from the Eastern Conference this year. I'm going to spoil it. I do not care. This is going to be my first A+ grade, and I am talking about none other than the New York Knickerbockers. So the New York Knicks, I feel like, killed this offseason. I feel like they killed it as much as you can almost kill it. So they re-signed OG Anunoby, which was huge, and they did it at a perfect timing because they waited until after they went ahead and traded them for Mikal Bridges to now complete the Villanova Knicks. They also are able to get some of their other guys. Jalen Brunson also got a 4-year max, and he took $100 million less. Like, the Knicks are just hitting on all cylinders. They ended up losing Bojan Bogdanovic, Alec Burks, Isaiah Hartenstein, which is huge, and Shake Milton. And they ended up getting Mikal Bridges, we talked about, Keita Bates-Diop, which we talked about a little earlier, and Cameron Payne to give them a little more backcourt help. But even the draft picks that they made, I really like. So with number 24 overall, they did draft Keyshawn George, but he was also traded to the Wizards. Then they end up getting Pacon Dadier, the guy out of France, at number 25. They end up getting Pacon Dadier at number 25, who I really like. Another sleeper pick, 6'7", young 3-and-D forward out of France. He's the fourth youngest in this draft. Shot over 36% from the three last year. Has really good upside to give them more of that wing versatile depth that they need. They also got Tyler Kolek out of Marquette in the second round, and he looks like he can be another potential backup guard option for them. Again, really good playmaker, really good decision maker. Is not going to turn the ball over for you. Going to make high-level decisions. Not going to give you many buckets, but can space the floor. Good lefty. And he looked good in the summer league. He looked like he was supposed to do he did what he was supposed to do, honestly. They had the number 40 overall pick where they got Oso Ighodaro. And honestly, I really liked Oso Ighodaro. He kind of has that Hartenstein little pick and pop, short roll, floater, push shot that you see a lot of bigs really utilizing this game. And it's a very valuable shot. Rashawn Holmes does it a lot. Hartenstein does it a lot. It's a very good shot to have. And also Ighodaro has that out of school. And I really would have wished they would have kept him. That's probably the only move that I feel like the Knicks did that I didn't love that they did. But again, it's not that big of a deal. He was ended up trading to the Suns. They did end up getting Ariel Hukporti late, which is another really big, physical, strong, lefty big, to end up bolstering their front court depth. And he also looked good. So even though they gave up Ighodaro, who I really like, they ended up still getting a big who can add them more depth, who is also I do like as well. Not as much as Ighodaro, but I also like him. And then they end up getting Kevin McCullough Jr., who probably won't play much for them, but, defensive chops. So, love this team. Love the team from start to finish. I love how aggressive they were in making moves, noticing that, hey, we have a good team, but we're not going to stay just good. We're going to go for great. And, I mean, everything. Like, I hope this is their starting lineup. They will go with Brunson. At the 2, you can go either way with DiVincenzo if you want a little bit more on-ball creation on offense, or Josh Hart if you want a little bit more big physical defense and rebounding. I probably would lean a little bit more, it'd be more towards Hart since they have so much offense in the starting lineup now with getting Bridges. But either way, you can go either way with one of those two guys. You got Mitchell Robinson holding down the 5. That's where I would go, and I would go with Bridges and OG Anunoby at those 3-4 positions, because I think Randall, although Randall is a good player, I do think he's a little bit disruptive to what they're trying to accomplish. However, if you put him at the 6-man and playing more in that Bobby Portis, Naz Reid type of role, I think he can actually really dominate even more than he has in that role. Of course, it'll be a step back for him coming off being an all-star to doing that. So if you can get him to buy into that, that's the only way that will work. But I really think that is the route for the Knicks to maximize their success that they have. Jericho Sims is another guy who showed some promise that, now that they have a little bit more front court room with Isaiah Hartenstein being gone, I know that's the big knock. Hartenstein played amazing for them. But, a lot of times when you have a vacancy, that opens up opportunities for another guy to step up. And I do think Jericho Sims showed promise there. They still have Precious Achiuwa, who, again, can give them depth and minute there, being really versatile out of Memphis. They still got McBride at the guard spot, too. They can even start him some. It's just this team is deep, man. This team is deep. This team is deep. They're ready to hoop. So the Knicks, they killed that. I mean, I can talk all day long about the Knicks. I can go in more detail, but we got to get to the rest of the team. So just know that the Knicks got an A+. Next, we're moving on to the Orlando Magic. So Orlando Magic, another good offseason. I'm really liking the moves that I've seen from teams. A lot of years we'll have teams doing a lot of moves, which I really, really don't like. This is a year where a lot of teams have made a lot of moves where I really agree with, or I at least like. And so, Orlando Magic, they started by re-signing Gogo Bitadze. Big Goga. Goga Bitadze. Everyone remember that video with him and Zion on his rookie year? Yeah, all the people in the comments, I mean, look how that went age. I'm off that. Anyway, they also re-signed Gary Harris, Jonathan Isaac to a 5-year extension, Franz Wagner, Mo Wagner, his other brother. Big addition, they got KCP out of free agency and ended up also getting Corey Joseph. And then they ended up losing Joe Ingles. With the number 18th overall pick, they drafted Tristan Da Silva out of Colorado and Antonio Reeves with pick number 47, who was then later traded to the Pelicans. So this team is an example of a team making one singular move which can really unlock the potential of an entire group. And I'm going to explain that. KCP signing was so crucial to helping unlock the potential of this team that it can't be overstated. The KCP signing really singularly makes everyone else's role make more sense. It kind of makes it clear. Now we know Jalen Suggs, okay, you're our guy. You're our guy at the one that makes the most sense. You're going to get us into our sets. You're going to play hard defense. You're going to make the necessary passes needed to be made, but you're comfortable being off the ball. Makes sense. We got our number one guy, Paolo. He's him. He's our guy that we're going to go off of. When we have our number two in Franz Wagner, they're the nice little 1-2 punch at the wing position. Not the most perfect fit of wings that we can have in the league, but two very good wings that we have. So we have two very good wings that we have. And then we still need a big man. We have Wendell Carter Jr. there, who's going to give us some versatility. You know, he can stretch the floor a little bit, very mobile, hustles hard, you know, a little undersized. So they may look to upgrade that position. And we also have Mo Wagner backing him up, giving us a lot of the same, but we don't really have true big rim protection. That's something we're missing, but still we have solid play in the center position. So at that 2-guard position, the main thing that we're missing, especially in that starting lineup, is some guy who is an actual NBA respectable knockdown 3-point shooter who also can guard really well at that guard spot. And KCP does both of those things beautifully. He also brings them veteran championship level experience who's going to help these young guys, especially Paolo and them, know how to do, because being the best player doesn't always make you the best leader, especially when you're young in the league and you're asked to lead guys. I'm sure Paolo's doing the best that he can, but it'll help to have a guy who's way older, more experienced, won at the highest level that you can win and been an integral part of that, and that's what KCP brings. You also have Corey Joseph, who you brought in, who, even if he doesn't play, he can at least help with that. So really like it. Jonathan Isaac, we'll see what we can get out of him. Again, coming off of those injuries. They may even look to play him a little bit more at the 5. I think they were interested in that look last year. And that gives you some more versatility having him on your roster. They brought back Gary Harris again to keep more veterans in. And again, Gary Harris also can do a little bit of what KCP does. Of course, not as good on either of those things, but you still have a guy who knows when to do things. So sometimes knowing when to do things is just as important, if not more important, as being able to do things. And so you have guys who can now fit that mold. Tristan Da Silva, really like their draft pick at number 18. He's a guy who can come in and play and contribute right away, look good in the summer league. He's going to knock down shots, going to cut at the right time, going to make the right plays. I mean, he's just, again, another one of those basketball players. Put him in the game, doesn't really matter the position. He's going to give you some positive minutes. Keeping Mo Wagner around. His brother, I think, is really good. And Mo Wagner is just a good player out of Michigan. Again, used to be dominant back in his college days. Everyone go check the tape. Jet Howard and Caleb Houston you have on your bench, who are young guys who can grow into those off-ball shooting roles. Jet Howard looked really good in summer. Caleb Houston is a knockdown shooter. So you have young guys who can kind of also learn from being around KCP, a guy who does that already at an effective level. These guys have the potential to do that at an effective level, just haven't all the way materialized it yet. And now Cole Anthony's role becomes a lot more clear as that 6-man role. And so KCP just being inserted into the team just kind of helped clearly define everyone's role, in my opinion, which is one of the more important things you can do on a basketball team. I really liked the Orlando Magic offseason. I gave them an A-. So talking all that to basically say I gave Orlando Magic an A-. Really like what they did. Next up, we have Philly, and this is going to be my second A+. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it again. So let's just start off with they got the biggest fish in free agency this year, Paul George. Paul George himself, they got him, they didn't have to trade for him. They got him in a clean signing. So, of course, they signed Paul George out of free agency. They also re-signed Kyle Lowry, which is good. KJ Martin, who I also like, giving them some nice energy off the bench, potentially if you need it. Tyrese Maxey, they got him on their extension. Kelly Oubre, who had a phenomenal season for them last year, who was also, to me, a very underrated player in the NBA. He also re-signed. They added Andre Drummond, which is a very good signing as a backup big in this league. Eric Gordon also gives them some veteran depth. They got Caleb Martin, who's probably going to be another starter for them, which is crazy. And they got him in free agency as well. Let's see. They got the 16th pick in the draft. They got Jared McCain, who's probably going to help them this year, who was one of the more NBA-ready players to make. He kind of fits their team to a T, fits exactly what they want from him. Not going to do too much, going to play off the ball, offer them some good shooting, compete hard on defense. Adam Bona, the 6'10 big out of UCLA, he also looked good in the Summer League. Now, he probably won't play that much being behind Embiid and Drummond, but knowing Embiid's health history and things of that nature, there are going to be some lineups where he's going to get some chance to shine, and he also looked very, very good to give you some more front court depth so that at least he can compete and play. Very athletic, competes hard on defense, strong frame. I mean, and they got him with the 41st pick. So I think that there's nothing that Philly did wrong. I think they did everything right. I mean, shout out to them. They literally handled free agency amazingly. I think they're definitely the other winners of free agency. I still like the Knicks slightly better, even though the Knicks had one thing I think I would maybe change and Philly didn't. I don't know. The Knicks just like whatever. But Philly just had the second best free agency to me by a hair. There's not really anything I would do too differently. And, they lost some players. They lost Nick Batum, which he was good for them. Mo Bamba didn't really do too much for them. Buddy Hield, who, also good for him. D'Anthony Melton, who I really like as a player. Cameron Payne and Paul Reed. So they lost guys, but they replaced them with guys who can all do their job just as good. So overall, Philly, I mean, they just killed it. Philly just killed it. And they still kept Ricky Council, who's we all know is a Philly fan favorite. Maybe he can break out and get into the rotation this year with consistent minutes. But they still got Ricky Council, and he was looking good in the Summer League too. I think he's ready to hoop too. So just a loaded squad this year. I think if you look at Philly's last year squad versus this year's squad, it's so drastically different. They probably made the biggest jump in terms of offseason to this year. So maybe they should have been the number one team. I don't know. But either way, it's both an A+, so it doesn't really matter too much. Next team to discuss is the Toronto Raptors. So Toronto started by re-signing Scottie Barnes, arguably the best modern power forward in the NBA, to a 5-year extension, definitely earned. They also signed Emmanuel Quickley to a 5-year extension, which, could go either way. Garrett Temple ended up re-signing, and they added Davion Mitchell in a trade with the Kings. And they end up losing Jalen McDaniels, who was also a part of that trade, going the other way. Gary Trent walked in free agency, which does hurt. They end up drafting Jacoby Walter, number 19th overall. Jonathan Mogbo, Jamal Sheed, who was originally drafted by Houston and then traded to Toronto. And yeah. So Toronto ended up drafting Jacoby Walter at number 19. And they got a couple of more guys later in the draft. Jamal Sheed looked like he had a pretty good moments in the Summer League. So they ended up getting some guys, but no one really too noteworthy in my opinion. So I just ended up giving them a C. It's like, again, overall, they didn't really do too much. It wasn't really a noteworthy offseason for the Six this year. Getting Barnes locked down was good. But they gave Quickley a $175 million extension, which, again, is not a worse thing because you have to – was not a terrible thing. You have to use the money somewhere. and it's a lot of times better to have control of an asset, in that way versus, of course, not doing that. And Quickly is a very, very good basketball player. I just view Quickly a little bit more as a sixth man than actually a lead guard. And I don't really know how they're going to work that out. Jacoby Walter also struggled a little bit in the summer league, and he's more of a off-ball scoring guard. And when you kind of pair these pieces, it kind of just looks a little clunky with R.J. Barrett. Grady Dick had a good second half of the season, so we're going to see if he can continue that into this year, which should be good. But it's just kind of a lot of guys at similar positions who aren't that much better than each other. Even Davion Mitchell, I think there's a world where you can make sense of starting Davion Mitchell, just having more of a off-ball defensive presence at that one spot versus Quickly, who's a little bit more of a scoring guard than a playmaking guard. And then R.J. Barrett, who's also looking to score, and then Grady Dick, who's more of an off-ball spacer. And you have Scotty Barnes, can score, but his natural disposition isn't really to just go out and get buckets. He's more of a defense facilitating and also scoring type of guy. You still got Jakob Poeltl there at the 5 and Chris Boucher. You got some guys, but it's just the team does not all the way making sense. And they have some older guys, some young guys. It's kind of a weird mix. They brought in Bruce Brown, which shout out to him for getting the bag, but where does he really fit into this team? Is it he's someone that they want to really keep so that they can try to compete more and help show the young guys, how it's done type of thing? Or is that another asset that they maybe flip for a more young player who they can build with? So I don't know. They can go either way. They can start rebuilding. Maybe we'll see them start wholesaling. Or maybe they'll just be headed towards purgatory and just stay there. Who knows? So nothing really too noteworthy for the Toronto Raptors. My grade for them is a C. Last but not least, we have the Washington Wizards, the poster children for the purgatory lane. And so, Washington this year, let's see what they did to try to change that narrative if possible. First thing they ended up doing was re-signing Richaun Holmes on a 2-year deal. They ended up getting Saddiq Bey in free agency. Malcolm Brogdon was added via trade, and their biggest offseason signing was Jonas Valanciunas from the Pelicans, which was an interesting move. They ended up losing Deni Avdija, which really hurt. I know a lot of Wizards fans. He was a bright spot in a pretty bad situation. So they ended up losing him in a trade, and they waived Landry Shamet. They had the number 2 overall pick, which was a silver lining, and ended up getting Alex Sarr, who was my number 1 player in the draft. And to me, I still think he's the best player out of that group, even despite having a horrible summer league showing. Number 14, they ended up getting Bub Carrington out of Pittsburgh. And they drafted Keyshawn George, who I do think will also contribute to them, and he has a lot of potential. I do like that trade with the Miami as a tall, rangy, shooting forward. Those guys always pretty much, can find themselves in the NBA and potentially contribute to winning. That's just a very valuable position to have. And then drafted Dylan Jones, but they ended up trading him to the Thunder. So let's just talk about these moves. Again, I like Alex Sarr pick at number 2. I really, really do. I think this gave this team a potential direction, and where we see that they're clearly committed to the rebuild, which is interesting for guys like Kyle Kuzma, which, again, we'll see what happens with him next year. I think most likely what will end up happening is they'll end up starting Kuzma at the 4, probably JV at the 5. You got Bilal Coulibaly, who had a decent rookie year, who's probably gonna be started at the 3. We see him getting a lot more run. Jordan Poole's most likely gonna be your starting 2. You paid him a whole lot of money. And as of today, as I'm making this video, I just found out that Tyus Jones is not re-signing with the Wizards. He actually is going to the Suns. So that starting point guard spot does open up a little bit more. So we'll see. Bub Carrington at 14, I really like him, giving them some more shot creation at that guard spot, at that 2-guard spot. I think he can be what they were hoping Johnny Davis could be for them, which is, again, that shot creating, pull-up, jump shooting guard, that Johnny Davis didn't really work out, but I do think Bub Carrington is a better version of that with a lot more potential. And like I said, I think they'll end up starting some of those guys like that. If it was me and I was running the Wizards organization, I'd probably look to offload Kuzma sometime during that offseason. I mean, sometimes during the midseason, leading up to the deadline, see if I can get any value from them, and maybe they're going to try to play Sarr at the 4. It seems like that may be the direction they're heading, trying to establish Sarr as maybe the 4, even if it's just early on. He does kind of have a little bit of that Evan Mobley type of game to him, where you don't really know if you want to play him at the 4 or 5. He kind of has a versatility to play some of the 4, but it's not that good of a shooter to really justify it, or to create that much spacing. He's a guy that more so can shoot, but at the 5, he's a little bit on the thinner side, so you don't really want to have him bumping and banging that much with the bigs. But outside of that, I think they made a lot of moves to really help their team. I mean, I really like them bringing in Saddiq Bey and Malcolm Brogdon and those guys who, again, are just going to make more solid reads and help everyone else's job become a lot easier. I told you I like to pull up shooting in the floor spacing of Keyshawn George out of Miami. He looks really good. Again, it really hurts losing Denny Avdija and now even Tyus Jones, which may change the grade because I made this before Tyus Jones was moved. They have Corey Kispert still coming off the bench, who's at least going to offer them some floor spacing. Again, not my favorite player in the world, but he still does do an NBA skill at an NBA level. So overall, I think the Wizards did good to kind of give themselves a direction. At first, when I was making this video earlier before they lost Tyus, I gave them a B for the offseason moves because I really like the value of number 2 pick Alex Sarr, and I really like Bub Carrington, and I really like getting them Keyshawn George, and I really like them adding Saddiq Bey, and I also like the fact that they, at first I didn't like the fact that they signed JV, didn't think it made much sense. Now, also really seeing Sarr, really like how he wants to play, it makes a lot more sense. Maybe they wanted him to sit behind a guy who's going to handle more of that, bruising role as Sarr develops physically and everything else. So overall, I gave them a B. Losing Tyus may bump this down to a B-, but either way, I do think it was at least a decent offseason for the Washington Wizards. So overall, that's going to do it for today's video. We ended up talking about the Eastern Conference teams, starting from the Atlanta Hawks, going all the way down to the Washington Wizards, talking about all of their free agent acquisitions, all-season trades, draft picks, things of that nature, giving every team a grade. Again, all of these are just my opinion, subject to change. More of the focus is more about talking about each of these moves and how we can see them potentially affecting their new teams than it was the actual grade. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and comment and subscribe. We have more content coming about all of these things. We'll be doing the Western Conference in the next couple of days, and we'll make sure we get that out to everyone else. Click the post notification bell if possible. It really helps me out a lot. And yeah, that was today's video. This is Hoop Symmetry, and I'm out.